Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mayor Cyril Jefferson convening a special meeting of the High Point City Council. Here with me in the room, we have every council member present save our Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Johnson. Before moving forward into our agenda, I'll ask if there's a motion to adopt our agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion is made by Councilmember Holmes, seconded by Councilmember Andrews. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? The ayes have it, and that motion passes. First item, in terms of presentation, is item 2025-450, Library Social Work Program Update. For that, we'll recognize our Director of the Library, Ms. Mary Sizemore.
Well, I will not be doing the presentation, but Eric Boucher will be doing that.
Okay, all right, guys. Well, feel free to come forward. Welcome.
Thank you all.
Glad to have y'all here with us.
And do we need to pull up?
Pull the presentations. I'll let the professionals do it.
But first off, thank you all for allowing us to come in and speak to you all. Tonight, I am joined here with our social worker that works within the library. She does the hard work every day. We were hoping that our peer navigator could join us, but he could not join us tonight. So us doing this presentation.
Alrighty, so we just wanted to briefly touch on the idea and the partnership behind Mental Health Associates of the Triad and the High Point Public Library, with the goal in mind to place a social worker and a peer navigator on site at the library, in hopes to be able to provide crisis response, resources, referrals, and of course a safe place for patrons. In hopes to build trust, reduce barriers, and then just connect even more High Point residents to even more long-term resources. So just quickly, we wanted to break down the difference in roles between the peer navigator and myself, the social worker. So the peer navigator, which is Eric Hector, he brings kind of that lived-in real experience from recovery to housing to mental health services. And because of that, he is able to build trust and rapport more quickly with patrons and able to help them with immediate needs. So job applications, computer assistance, housing referrals. My role as a social worker is geared more towards providing crisis intervention, de-escalation, and then complex case management.
Right, and our partnership with the public library, the whole intent was to bring mental health services to people who would never come to our clinic, would never show up to our office. And we were able to accomplish that, which we'll touch on in just a second.
Yeah, so the startup phase of our program, September 24 to November 2024. This highlights the data from the peer navigator. So he had about 52 interactions within those months. Most of those individuals were insured and did have a PCP, but there were still a number that were uninsured or did not have a PCP. And so he did provide those referrals for health services and mental health services, as well as made several community partner contacts.
Right, and I think when we first started too, it was also letting people know that we were there. I think that was the hardest thing, was to get people to understand that we were there to provide support when they needed it.
And during this time, our data was separate between the peer navigator and the social worker. So this kind of highlights my data through those months. I did have cases that were fewer in number, but that was largely because they were more complex cases and required several steps. During that time, again, several folks were insured and did have a PCP, but there was still a number that did not. So I did make several referrals to Triad Adult and Pediatric, MHA, Department of Social Services, Caring Services, and then housing providers, so Partners Ending Homelessness, housing authorities. And then again, did provide a few in-house items, so food, snack packs, yeah.
And I think that was also during the time where we were trying to establish more strategic partnerships, create a balanced referral process so that we can get people in and out more quickly, which we were able to do with Open Doors as well as Leslie's House for our women. And then we started standardized data starting in December 24, and then we have data up until September of this year.
Yeah, so again, our data comes in two parts. So the first part is that startup phase between September and November, very surface level case notes. But moving into December and forward, we got more in depth with tracking the data and being able to see the full program view.
And I think it was important once we started having our standardized monthly reports, which showed consistency among different categories, whether someone was homeless, whether someone was coming to the library to seek employment assistance. I think the other thing that's important to note during this time, just some quick high-level data before we get into it. Since launching, we've served over 1,000 residents, and more than 80% had no prior link to care systems, which means these are individuals who never showed up to, a lot of times, to their PCP provider or showed up to mental health. So I
What
think
was that
that's
percentage
critical.
again? You said 84%?
80%.
80%.
80% had no prior link to care systems, and these were individuals who we may cross paths with, whether it's we're out doing outreach, just people who we try to get into our clinic who may never show up to our clinic. We'll touch on that in a second. But this looks at 10 months of data, and each month we tracked demographics, needs identified, and then a full year data set.
Yep, so some of these big numbers, so total served 623. We had a fairly good ratio between men and women, but there were still more men served than women. We had goals completed, we had 438 goals completed. A number of those were ongoing, but we had very few that we weren't able to reach those goals, which could have been for different reasons. Some of the top areas, so employment is something that we are persistently see on an ongoing basis and shows high numbers, as well as housing cases. And then furthermore, we have shelter placements, Medicaid, Social Security, and disability support. So that's really looking like it's a lengthy process, so just supporting them through that application process, and then accessing food and nutrition services, and then others as well.
And what is also interesting about this data is you can see, we first started, I'm like, okay, we're going to treat more women than men. And I was wrong. And what you find is that more women are more willing to come to a clinic versus men who will not set foot in a mental health clinic, however you look at it. And we even see that, in outpatient behavioral health services. And I think, a lot of times, men, they suffer in silence. And, oftentimes, they try to tough it out. We see a lot of veterans, but at the same time, these are regular individuals that we're treating who, just for whatever reason, will not show up in our clinic.
So again, some of those big services we provide is employment. This is probably the most requested service month after month. So this looks like helping them put in those job applications, because everything really is online now. So helping them get those job applications in, create their resumes, and get ready for their interviews. We also provide housing and shelter resources. Referring them to the housing authority, to Partners Ending Homelessness, and getting them placed in emergency shelter. Again, with healthcare and benefits, so accessing their Medicaid benefits, Medicare benefits, as well as food stamps benefits.
One of the major issues we identified early on when we first started this project was that individuals who did not have an address could not access benefits, which means we had to then go purchase a P.O. box to have individuals receive mail. I receive mail every day for individuals who are at our library because they do not have an address. And if you do not have an address, your benefits stop. And sometimes if you don't have an address, they don't even start because you can't even complete the application process. So I think that's a bigger issue that continues to hold people back from accessing benefits that are theirs.
Mm-hmm. So some of the key trends in the early months, again, during that startup period, a lot of it was employment and getting them set up with some of those basic benefits of food stamps and Medicaid. Moving into winter and spring, our numbers kind of skyrocketed, and with that, the cases became more challenging and more required multiple steps. Moving into the summer, while housing and employment is still showing big numbers, we've also broadened our services. So Eric, the peer navigator, he provides transportation if they need to get to Social Security office or the DSS office. We also help them get those vital documents, so getting their ID, their Social Security card, their birth certificate. And then on top of that, our referrals have escalated as well, referring to other outside agencies and community partners.
And I think as we move forward is really making sure we solidify those strategic partnerships, but I also think she touched on something which is transportation. And part of this initiative was to make sure we have funding to be able to provide park bus transfers as well as High Point city transit bus passes. And so we were able to truly make sure that people could even get to their job, to be able to get to their interviews. And so that's been extremely helpful, and just the sheer need of that over time has just continued to increase.
So I think that one of the most important things that we've learned from the data is that this program has been able to fill a gap by providing an on-site social worker and an on-site peer navigator. It builds that low to no barrier in getting those services. And another big thing that we've learned is that while needs are immediate, like emergency shelter and food, they're also long-term, so building that employment and housing stability. As Mr. Fouché also touched on before, is the library setting. Some folks might have had not great experiences or even traumatic experiences in the past and may not be comfortable in a government building or an agency. And so having us in the library can kind of relieve some of that intimidation.
Absolutely. And then kind of what we learned was just looking at people who often come to the library. It's not just one need, it's multi-layered. So some person may come in looking at food resources, someone else may come in looking at employment. One thing that stood out to me when you look at cost avoidance, each prevented crisis call or ER visit saves the city from $1,000 to $2,500. This is based on the average cost to take someone to Atrium or somewhere else for inpatient care. When looking at our ability to stabilize just 10% of the clients that we serve avoids roughly anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 annually in public costs. The other thing that's important to note is not only are we addressing that need, the other thing is when you look at some of the stories and the people who we've been able to help, we had a lady who was sleeping outside of our office in our parking lot. What I would find is that I typically try to get there, I'm usually there at 7 o'clock. So she would leave like 6:30. I kept seeing a car pull out. I said, look, we have people at the library who can help provide assistance and support. Eric, who's our peer navigator, was able to help her with housing. We got her placed in Leslie House. The difficult thing was, though, she had a child. We were able to find family resources that would take the child and house her in Leslie's house. That's the other thing, but we'll talk about that later. But I think it's overly difficult when families have children. But what we were able to do was find her housing. Then we were able to find her employment. And so now she is an apartment where she has supported employment and supportive housing. And this is someone who is literally living in a car, fleeing from a domestic violence situation. So, and we've got all kinds of stories like that, but I think it's important to note that we see this day in and day out. I know she sees it. And just, we can't thank you all enough for just supporting this initiative. And then some of the key takeaways is just looking at roughly, given the months and in the winter months, this number can increase to over 80, but still looking at employment and housing as being our top items. What's interesting though, and what we're finding is that there are so many people that's being dropped from their insurance right now because they cannot afford the premium. So although we expanded Medicaid, they still cannot afford to pay the premiums, and we're seeing them drop off. And we're trying to help when we can. But again, if they do not pay the premiums and they're on prepaid health plans, which is a Medicaid plan, if they don't pay those premiums, they're getting dropped. And so we're working to try to see what we can do to help bridge that gap, but it's not talked about enough. And so anything else you want to add?
No.
All right. Any specific questions that you all may have?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you both for the presentation. Every time I'm in the library, I'm struck by the diversity of people that come in, right? There are older people, there are people with kids, families, And it's such a resource to have that type of service at our public library. Because some people may not even understand the need until they're confronted with the solution. And so the fact that we have that there is, I believe, a huge benefit to our community. Question, you talked about how you were surprised that there were more men served than women. What do you think is driving the fact that you're able to capture that population versus them not coming to a clinic in a traditional sense?
So that is a great question, and I think part of that is you still have the stigma attached to it, however you look at it, especially for men. You know, we often, take on things and we deal with our own struggles, but we may not go and talk to someone about it, and that's what you see. Or at least that's what I've known the past 20 years doing this. That is the biggest thing we see. They just don't feel comfortable coming to a brick and mortar location, but they will feel comfortable going to a library to talk to Eric versus, coming to talk to a therapist, and that's what we see.
Any other questions?
I have one. Talk about the complexity of cases. So I know it's going to run the gamut, but maybe the typical length of helping somebody, I know it's going to vary. Maybe the shortest time to kind of the longest time.
Yeah, so I have folks that I've been working with for the past year now that we're still working on the housing and the employment. But then I have other folks that I worked with from anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and now they have all of those goals met. They are housed, they are working, and they have those resources. So I think it definitely can vary, but yeah, I've seen it go anywhere from 3 to 6 months to over a year now. Yeah.
And I'll close. I want to say this one last thing. I think one thing we're also seeing now is that historically you would think, we're just seeing homeless people. No. We're seeing the warehouse worker that has 3 kids with a house that lives right down the street, who is coming in for support and help. And that has really been a shift. And we're even seeing it at our clinic, where we're seeing, more people that are coming in and reaching out for additional help and support. So I think that is definitely something that we will continue to, improve upon, making sure we continue to provide the services that we're doing there at the library. So,
And any additional questions?
I just have one. If there was a need that you could identify that could improve the program, what would that be?
Like as far as like the resources available, yeah, I think housing is always going to be the biggest one. There's definitely not enough resources compared to the need. And so, yeah, I think that will always be the biggest one is housing resources. Right now, we do have great housing resources, but there's also a waiting list for everything. There's a limited number of shelters and a limited number of beds. So I think housing.
and I think it has to be transitional housing.
Yeah.
That
I think
too.
it's one thing to put people in certain places, but there are just some people who are not going to go to a shelter.
Right.
I mean, they will literally be homeless before they show up at a shelter, but versus transitional housing where we can truly provide the supports needed and transition them out short-term, 3 months,
Yeah.
8 weeks, whatever we need. I think that's critical to moving this forward. At least in High Point, and we're seeing it a lot in High Point.
Thank y'all for the presentation, but before you go, I'm curious, I know when we enacted this program a few years ago, some of our discussions on this, I'm gonna oversimplify it a little bit here, y'all, but it was kind of 2 big objectives on our mind. It was, can we take care of more of our people? And you all, I think I've talked quite a bit about that in terms of, 80% had no prior link to care systems. The fact that men less likely to go into a clinic now are seeing this as a point of entry to get support, and you're beginning to make real connections. So I see that as one objective that we're certainly checking the box on in terms of taking care of our people. But I think the other objective that where we felt the city had a value proposition here was that we offer a library service that at times for various patrons can be disrupted based on who shows up. And so rather than sort of kick against a prick or knock our head against the wall and just get mad and try to kick people out all the time, we said, well, if folks are gonna already be there, can we take care of them? because they're already there. And if we do that, will that improve the overall quality of service that the library sees? I'd be curious, and it wasn't in this presentation, I don't know if you have the information today for us, Ms. Sizemore, but in terms of reduced calls to 911, any idea there if we're seeing a drop off in terms of various incidents that maybe we had seen before?
I don't have specific numbers, but it has dropped off. Whereas before, our first response to a very disruptive or, disturbing behavior would be to call 911. And sometimes we still have to. I mean, it's just over the top. But now we have another step. We'll go get one of the social, we'll get Emily or Eric, and they are very good at de-escalating. And sometimes we even can kind of prevent something like that. If we see someone maybe heading in the direction where they might, we can pull them in and they don't even have the chance to completely.
And I think to piggyback off of what Mary is saying too, you have to also look at, if we're able to get individuals employment and jobs, there's really no need for them to keep continuing to come. And we have some that will show up regardless. But I think what we've been able to see and what we've been able to accomplish is just that. What we talked about early on was, could we, not have the library serve as the front door for behavioral health services. And so that's what we've been attempting to do. And for those individuals who need ongoing, more intensive treatment, we're getting them referred, we're getting them resources, but you have some that will just never show up in an outpatient clinic. So to Mary's point, when we look at cost avoidance, we are tracking some of that data. And that's where we got some of those figures from. Can we, stop the calls to police and stop the calls for EMS taking someone to the ED as a result of a mental health crisis. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I should note, you did mention that figure in terms of what it costs us when someone has to get a call for ED or cops come pick them up. I think this body would probably benefit, Madam Manager, from being able to somehow see what our baseline was before in terms of calls from the library for folks via disruption or just whatever, and then where we are now maybe and what's being negated because of the services. I know it won't be one-to-one, apples to apples to try to make the comparison, but at least digging into somewhat of the numbers, I imagine our folks at 911 are able to tell us calls coming from library and then be able to see what that number is now versus what it was before we made this investment. And again, we don't have to be perfect here, but knowing the numbers enables us to measure it and monitor it and keep improving on it. To be clear, if I didn't think this was a great program, I wouldn't have been the one to support it a couple of years ago when we enacted it. I think it's a phenomenal program, and I probably should have led by saying that, by the way. Thank you. I think it's a phenomenal program, and would love for us as we continue to support the value proposition of programs like this one, just to have some of that information that I think we all need to feel comfortable about the investment. The other reason why I'm thinking it, if I'm just being honest, is that I think at some point, chatting with our good friends at Guilford County would make sense about how we support programs like this one, given that it is their purview to do social and human services just like this. And so that's really where my brain's going on all this, but I think a little bit more information could be really valuable for us.
And I like that.
This was fantastic.
And I like that, because as we track cost avoidance, that's still an important cost that you want to know about. We can say, yeah, we avoided that one person from going to EMS, so EMS was never called, but that's not data that you all would have. So being able to pull the 911 data would give us clear results to say is it increasing or decreasing as part of what we're doing.
We'll get that information for you, Mayor, and provide a follow-up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Next item is item 2025-445. It's closed session. Is there a motion to go to close? Motion is recognized to Councilmember Harmon and second to Councilmember Peters because they tried harder than everyone else. Any discussion on the motion to go into closed session? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it, and we'll go into closed session.